You wake up at 3 in the morning to the sound of tapping. Not rain on your window, not a tree branch against the roof. It's Morse code coming through the walls from the apartment next door in Nazi Berlin in 1942, and you realize with absolute terror that your neighbor is transmitting secrets to the enemy. What do? Do you report them and watch them die? Or do you stay silent and become complicit in treason? This was the nightmare reality for millions of Germans living next to the most dangerous people in the Third Reich. Not soldiers, not assassins, radio operators. You think you understand courage. You think you know what resistance means. But imagine sitting at an illegal radio transmitter while Nazi direction, finding vans circle your block like sharks smelling blood. Imagine tapping out military secrets in Morse code while the Gestapo tortures your friends 3 streets away to get your location. Imagine doing this every single night, knowing that one mistake, 1 second too long on the air, means not just your death, but the death of everyone you love. This is the story of the Red Orchestra, the most daring spy network in World War II history. A network of ordinary people who used invisible radio waves to fight the most visible evil the world had ever seen. In the next 2 hours, I'm going to take you inside their world. You'll learn exactly how they built transmitters from spare parts, how they encoded messages that saved tens of thousands of Soviet soldiers, how they recruited spies inside Hitler's own ministries, and how they ultimately failed in the most tragic way imaginable. But here's what matters for you today. We live in an age where one encrypted message can topple governments, where whistleblowers face the same choice these people faced: truth or safety, conscience or survival. By the end of this story, you'll understand why some chose to die rather than stay silent. And you'll ask yourself the most uncomfortable question of all: what would you have done? Let me take you back to Berlin, 1938. Before the war, before the death camps, before the world understood what Nazi Germany would become. Persian rugs on polished wood floors, books lining the walls from floor to ceiling, the smell of Turkish tobacco and expensive coffee. This is the home of Arvid Harnack, a respected economics professor, and his American wife Mildred. They host salons where Berlin's intellectuals gather to discuss Goethe and Shakespeare, the kind of cultured, sophisticated people who would never betray their country, except they already had. Arvid wasn't just a professor. He was building something that would make him one of the most wanted men in Nazi Germany. While his colleagues joined the party for career advancement, Arvid watched the SA thugs beating Jewish shopkeepers in broad daylight. He read Hitler's economic plans and saw they led straight to war. And he asked himself a question that would cost him everything. How do you fight evil when evil controls the state? You have to understand the suffocating reality of Nazi surveillance. Every apartment building had a block warden who reported suspicious behavior. Every workplace had a party cell watching for disloyalty. Children were taught to inform on their parents. Your own family could be your enemy. The Gestapo had perfected a system of control that makes modern surveillance states look amateur. They didn't need cameras on every corner. They had something more effective: fear, the knowledge that anyone, anywhere could be listening, watching, reporting. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times today have you said something that could be misinterpreted? How many jokes have you made that someone could take the wrong way? Now imagine that every one of those moments could get you arrested, tortured, killed. That's the world Arvid Harnack navigated every single day, where even buying the wrong newspaper could mark you as suspicious. Where not attending a Nazi rally was noted in your file. Where your children's teachers asked them what their parents said at home. So how do you organize resistance when a single wrong word can get you killed? Arvid's answer was brilliant and terrible. You hide in plain sight. You use your privilege, your education, your reputation as armor. You recruit carefully, testing each person with subtle probes. A comment about the economy here. A joke about Goering's weight there. Watching who laughs, who looks uncomfortable. Who shows that flash of recognition that says, "I think like you think." But here's what Hollywood never shows you about spying: the loneliness. The crushing, suffocating loneliness of living a double life. Arvid couldn't tell his colleagues what he really thought, couldn't confide in his friends. Couldn't even be completely honest with his own family. Every relationship became a performance. Every conversation required careful calculation. Is this person safe? Can I trust them? Are they testing me? The paranoia eats at you like acid. One of his first recruits would become the most important. Harro Schulze-Boysen looked like a Nazi propaganda poster. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed Aryan perfection. An officer in the Luftwaffe married to a beautiful aristocrat, the last person anyone would suspect of treason. But Harro had a secret the Nazis didn't know. They'd arrested him in 1933 for publishing anti-Nazi articles, tortured him, beat him until his ribs cracked and his kidneys bled. They thought they'd broken him. They'd only made him more dangerous. Let me tell you exactly what they did to Harro in 1933. They hung him from chains, whipped him with steel cables, made him stand for days without sleep, forced him to watch as they tortured other prisoners. Why am I telling you this? Because you need to understand what kind of courage it took for him to resist again. Most people who experience torture never recover. They break inside. They spend the rest of their lives avoiding any risk, any danger. Harro went the opposite direction. He decided that if they were going to kill him anyway, he might as well make it count. By 1940, Harro worked in the Reich Air Ministry's intelligence section. He saw everything. Luftwaffe deployment orders, aircraft production numbers, fuel supplies, intelligence that could change the course of the war, and he photographed it all. But here's the problem that every spy faces. Intelligence is worthless if you can't get it to someone who can use it. You can't mail it. The Gestapo reads mail. You can't use the telephone. The lines are tapped. You can't travel. Your movements are tracked. You need something that can cross borders instantly, invisibly, untraceably. You need radio. But if you're still watching, you're about to discover why radio was both the solution and the trap. Because the moment you transmit, you become a beacon. The Nazis had mobile detection vans with rotating antennas that could triangulate your position. 3 vans working together could locate you within 50 meters. 50 meters in a city like Berlin might be 3 apartment buildings, but that's close enough for the Gestapo to start knocking on doors. What if I told you that the technology they used is the same principle your smartphone uses to find cell towers? The same basic physics. Radio waves travel in straight lines. Multiple receivers can determine direction. Simple triangulation gives you location. The Nazis were using 1940s technology to do what the NSA does today with your phone: track, locate, identify, capture. The Soviets understood this problem. They'd been running agent networks since the revolution. They knew that human couriers were slow and vulnerable. Dead drops could be discovered. But radio, despite its dangers, was instant. A message encrypted in Berlin could be decoded in Moscow within hours, so they sent their best radio operators into Europe before the war. Men like Johann Wenzel, who could build a transmitter from parts you'd find in any radio repair shop. Who could tap out Morse code at 30 words per minute, even with his hands shaking from fear. Johann Wenzel was a special kind of professional. He'd learned radio in the Soviet military, then trained specifically for clandestine operations. He knew how to build a transmitter that looked like a regular radio from the outside, but could switch to transmission mode with the flip of a hidden switch. He understood antenna theory, how to calculate the exact length of wire needed for optimal transmission on specific frequencies. He knew that a transmitter's power output created heat, and heat could be detected by infrared equipment the Germans were developing. Every technical detail mattered when your life depended on not being detected. These Soviet professionals taught the German recruits everything. First, Morse code. Not just learning it, but drilling it until it became muscle memory. Because when you're terrified, when you hear footsteps in the hallway, your mind goes blank. You need your fingers to remember what your brain forgets. Dit dit dit, da da da, dit dit dit. The rhythm of resistance. But here's something most people don't know about Morse code. Every operator has a unique fist, a personal rhythm and style as distinctive as a fingerprint. The way you space your dots and dashes, the speed of your sending, the tiny hesitations between letters. Soviet receivers could identify who was transmitting just by listening to their fist. This was crucial for security. If an operator was captured and forced to transmit under duress, the change in their fist would alert Moscow that something was wrong. Then came encryption. The Soviets used one-time pads, the only truly unbreakable code if used correctly. Picture a pad of random letters. You write your message, you apply the pad letter by letter, creating gibberish. You transmit the gibberish. Moscow has an identical pad. They reverse the process. Unless you make a mistake, unless you reuse a pad, unless the Gestapo captures your codebook, the human element. That's always what breaks these things. The process was exhausting. First, you'd write your message in German, then translate it to Russian if required. Then encode it using the one-time pad. Each letter had to be converted according to the pad's random key. O becomes Q, B becomes M, C becomes F. No pattern, no logic, pure randomness. One mistake and the entire message becomes undecipherable. Now imagine doing this by candlelight, because electric lights might attract attention. With freezing fingers, because heating was restricted and you couldn't afford to seem different from your neighbors. While listening for every sound that might signal the Gestapo approaching. Let me take you inside the transmission. January 1942, a freezing night in Berlin. The radio operator is Hans Koppe, a young communist recruited by Schulze-Boysen. The apartment is dark except for a single shielded lamp. The windows are covered with blackout curtains and blankets to muffle sound. Hans has spent 2 hours encoding tonight's message using the one-time pad. Intelligence about Wehrmacht divisions moving east. Tank production figures from the Krupp factories. Luftwaffe losses over Britain that the propaganda ministry is hiding. His wife Hilda stands by the window watching the street. If she sees anything suspicious, she'll tap twice on the wall. Hans will have 30 seconds to hide the transmitter, burn the cipher pad, and pretend to be asleep. They've practiced this drill dozens of times. But practice doesn't stop your heart from racing when it's real. What if Hilda saw a van parking outside right now? What if she recognized the distinctive antenna array of a direction-finding vehicle? She'd have to make a choice in a split second. Warn Hans and try to escape, knowing they'd probably be caught, or let him finish the transmission, knowing every extra second of intelligence sent might save lives on the Eastern Front. These were the calculations they made every night. Life versus duty, love versus cause. Hans connects the antenna wire that runs up through the ceiling into the attic. Not ideal. A proper antenna would be outside, high up, clear of obstacles. But proper antennas get noticed. Everything about clandestine radio is compromise. Power versus detection, speed versus accuracy, safety versus effectiveness. The antenna itself is a marvel of improvisation. 40 meters of copper wire stolen inch by inch from telephone installations over months, strung back and forth across the attic beams in a pattern calculated to maximize transmission while minimizing visibility from the street. Connected to the transmitter through a hole drilled in the ceiling and disguised as water damage. Every element has been thought through, planned, implemented with life-or-death precision. He puts on the headphones and listens. Static, good, no one else transmitting on this frequency. He checks his watch. 2 minutes until his scheduled transmission window. Moscow will be listening. If he doesn't transmit, they'll assume he's been captured. If he transmits late, he might overlap with another agent, jamming both signals. Timing is everything. In Moscow, a young woman named Katya sits in a concrete bunker 60 feet underground. She's been on duty for 12 hours, headphones clamped to her ears, listening to static. She's one of dozens of operators monitoring frequencies assigned to agents across Europe. She doesn't know their real names, doesn't know their faces, only their call signs and their fists. Hans is Mozart, a name chosen by someone with a dark sense of humor about the German term piano concerts for radio transmissions. 2:45 a.m. Hans places his finger on the Morse key and begins. Dit-da-dit-dit-da-da-da. The encrypted message flows into the ether at the speed of light. Somewhere in Moscow, Katya straightens in her chair. Mozart is on the air. She starts copying. Her hand moves automatically, transcribing dots and dashes that mean nothing to her. That's for the decoders. She just has to get it right. One missed letter could corrupt the entire message. But here's what Hans doesn't know, what none of them know yet. The Funkabwehr, the German Radio Defense Corps, has been tracking these transmissions for months. They call them piano concerts because of the way Morse code sounds, and they're getting better at finding the pianists. Tonight, 3 grey vans prowl the streets of Berlin. Inside each van, a technician wearing headphones slowly rotates a loop antenna mounted on the roof. They're hunting. Searching the electromagnetic spectrum for unauthorized transmissions. When Hans begins sending, all 3 vans detect his signal simultaneously. The hunt begins. Van 1 is in Alexanderplatz, 4 kilometers from Hans's apartment. The operator notes the bearing, 247 degrees. He radios the information to control. Van 2 is in Potsdamer Platz, bearing 0118 degrees. Van 3 near the Brandenburg Gate, bearing 063 degrees. In the control room, a technician plots the 3 bearings on a map of Berlin. Where they intersect, Charlottenburg. They're getting closer. Feel that chill running down your spine? That's the same chill Hans felt every time he transmitted. Because he knew that somewhere out there in the frozen Berlin night, men in grey vans were hunting him. Their rotating antennas, searching for his signal like compass needles, seeking north. Every second he stayed on the air brought them closer. What if I told you that the Nazis had actually captured a Red Orchestra radio operator 6 months earlier? What if they'd tortured him until he gave up his transmission schedule? What if they were listening to Hans right now, triangulating his position, preparing to strike? Would you keep transmitting, or would you run? Hans keeps transmitting. The message is too important. Intelligence about Operation Blue, the German summer offensive towards Stalingrad. If Moscow knows where the attack is coming, they can prepare. They can save divisions. Maybe turn the tide of the war. So Hans keeps his finger on the key, even though every instinct screams at him to stop. But let me tell you about the physical toll of this work. Hans's hand cramps from the precise movements required for clear Morse. Sweat drips from his forehead despite the freezing temperature. His heart rate is over 140 beats per minute, the same as a sprinter in a race. The stress hormones flooding his system are literally killing him. Studies of captured SOE radio operators after the war showed they aged 5 years for every year they operated. The human body isn't designed for this level of sustained terror. 20 minutes. That's how long it takes to send the full message. 20 minutes of being a lighthouse in the dark for Nazi hunters. Finally, he sends his signature. Each operator has one, a unique pattern that tells Moscow who's transmitting. Then silence. He shuts down the transmitter. Disconnects the antenna. Hides everything in the false bottom of a wardrobe that looks solid but has a hidden compartment built by a carpenter in the network who specialized in such things. Then he and Hilda sit in the darkness, listening, waiting. Every sound could be them, every car engine, every footstep. Every door slam. They wait until dawn, nothing happens, they've survived another night. But the circle is tightening. The tragedy of the Red Orchestra wasn't that they were caught. Every spy expects to be caught eventually. The tragedy was that their intelligence, bought with such courage and pain, was often ignored. Stalin didn't trust his own spies. He thought the reports about German invasion plans were British disinformation. He ignored warnings that could have saved millions of Soviet lives. Imagine risking everything to send intelligence that your own side doesn't believe. Would you keep going? Stalin's paranoia ran so deep that he had some of his own intelligence officers shot for reporting German troop buildups. He believed they were either German double agents or British provocateurs trying to provoke a war between Germany and the USSR. The Red Orchestra was sending pure gold intelligence, and Stalin was treating it like lead. When Barbarossa launched on June 22, 1941, exactly as the Red Orchestra had warned, Stalin had a nervous breakdown. He'd ignored months of detailed warnings from his best sources, but they did keep going, night after night, message after message. Because stopping meant admitting that all their sacrifices meant nothing, that their friends had died for nothing. And because, deep down, they still believed that truth matters, that someone, somewhere, would listen. If you're still here, you're about to discover how the network expanded beyond anyone's imagination. Because the Red Orchestra wasn't just Berlin, it was a symphony played across an entire continent. Brussels, Paris, Amsterdam, Warsaw, Prague, each city with its own network, its own radio operators, its own deadly game of cat and mouse with the Nazi hunters. The Brussels network was even more audacious. Run by Leopold Trepper, a Polish Jew who spoke 5 languages and had more identities than a spy novel, Trepper didn't just run agents, he ran businesses. Real companies that did real work and provided perfect cover for espionage. His main front was a raincoat manufacturer called Simexco. Think about the brilliance of that. Raincoats need waterproofing chemicals that could also be used to make invisible ink. Raincoats get exported across Europe, perfect for moving agents and equipment. Raincoats need sales representatives who travel constantly. Perfect cover for meeting contacts. Trepper was a master of what spies call commercial cover. He understood that the best lies contain truth. His companies made real products, paid real taxes, employed real workers who had no idea their boss was Soviet intelligence. When the Gestapo investigated, they found legitimate businesses with legitimate contracts. It took them years to realize these businesses were also intelligence operations. Trepper recruited one of the most remarkable spies of the war, Suzanne Spach, a Belgian aristocrat married to a wealthy filmmaker. Suzanne had everything: money, status, safety. She threw it all away to save Jewish children. She used her connections to get exit visas, her money to bribe officials, her home to hide families. And when that wasn't enough, she joined the Red Orchestra to fight the system that was murdering children. Can you imagine the courage that took? Suzanne wasn't trained for this. She was a mother of 2 who'd never broken a law in her life. But she looked at what was happening and decided that comfortable complicity was worse than dangerous resistance. She became a courier, carrying messages between cells. She recruited new agents from her social circle. She turned her dinner parties into intelligence-gathering operations. Here's what Suzanne understood that most people didn't. The Nazis weren't just a German problem, they were a human problem, a cancer that would spread unless someone stopped it. And waiting for someone else to be that someone was how evil triumphed. So she acted. Despite the danger, despite the fear, despite having everything to lose and nothing personal to gain. The Amsterdam network was perhaps the most tragic. Run by the Goulouse family, Dutch communists who'd been fighting fascism since the Spanish Civil War. They operated from a house on Prinsengracht, not far from where Anne Frank was hiding. The same neighborhood, the same danger. Different choices about how to respond. The Goulouses didn't just transmit intelligence. They published an underground newspaper called De Waarheid, the Truth. Every issue was an act of rebellion. Every copy that passed from hand to hand was a small victory against Nazi propaganda. But publishing required printing. Printing required equipment. Equipment that was illegal and impossible to hide if the Gestapo searched your house. So they hid it in plain sight. The printing press was disguised as industrial equipment in a factory owned by a sympathetic businessman. The paper was stolen in small amounts from different suppliers. The ink was made from ingredients that could be explained as art supplies. Every element had a cover story. Every person had an alibi. But cover stories only work if no one looks too closely. The Paris network was run by the legendary Léon Grossvogel, another of Trepper's recruits. Grossvogel was a businessman who understood that the best cover is success. His companies made money, real money that funded real operations. He employed dozens of people who had no idea they were working for Soviet intelligence, the perfect cell structure, each person knowing only what they needed to know. But here's where human nature becomes the enemy. People talk. They gossip. They brag. They fall in love with the wrong person. They get drunk and say things they shouldn't. Every network has weak links. People who joined for the wrong reasons. For adventure. For money. For revenge. Not for ideology. And when the pressure comes, these are the ones who break. What if your best friend was secretly working for the resistance? What if they asked you to help, just once, just a small thing? Deliver this envelope. Don't ask what's inside. Would you do it? Would you risk your life for a cause you might not even fully understand? Most people say yes when they imagine themselves as heroes. But heroism is easy in imagination. It's different when the Gestapo is at your door. By late 1941, the Red Orchestra was the most successful spy network in Nazi Europe. Over 300 agents and contacts, dozens of radio transmitters. Intelligence flowing from inside Hitler's own government to Moscow. They'd warned about the invasion of the Soviet Union, about the plans for Leningrad, about the drive toward Moscow. Not all their intelligence was acted on, but it was getting through. They were making a difference. The network had developed sophisticated techniques for evading detection. They used burst transmissions, pre-recorded messages sent at high speed to minimize time on air. They employed ghost transmitters, dummy stations that transmitted meaningless traffic to confuse direction-finding efforts. They created radio games, captured operators forced to transmit under German control, but using pre-arranged signals to warn Moscow of their capture. But success in espionage is dangerous. The bigger you get, the more visible you become. And the Red Orchestra was about to make a fatal error that would bring everything crashing down. In June 1941, a Soviet radio operator in Brussels made an error that would doom them all. The operator was rushed. The message from Moscow was urgent. Germany was about to invade the Soviet Union. Get confirmation. Get details. Get it now. So the operator broke protocol. Instead of using the complex cipher system, he sent part of a message in clear text. Just a few words. An address in Berlin. The home of Ilse Stube, a journalist who worked in the foreign ministry. She'd been recruited by Rudolf Herrnstadt, a German communist who'd fled to the Soviet Union in 1933. Ilse had access to diplomatic cables, foreign intelligence reports, internal foreign ministry discussions about German war plans. She was one of the most valuable agents in the network. And now her address was floating through the airwaves in clear text. They always listened, and suddenly they had something concrete, an address, a starting point. The Gestapo put Ilse Stube under surveillance, watched who visited, followed them, watched them, built a map of connections. But they didn't arrest anyone, not yet. This is the cold brilliance of counterintelligence. When you find one spy, you don't grab them immediately. You watch, you wait, you let them lead you to others. You build a picture of the entire network. Then, when you strike, you get everyone. For 6 months, the Gestapo watched and waited. They identified Schütze-Boysen, Harnack, dozens of others. They tapped phones, opened mail, placed informants, built files. And the Red Orchestra kept operating, not knowing that every transmission, every meeting, every contact was being recorded. The surveillance operation was massive. Over 200 Gestapo agents assigned to watch Red Orchestra members. They photographed everyone who entered Harnack's apartment. They followed Schütze-Boysen's wife Libertas to her film studio, documenting everyone she met. They intercepted mail, steam-opening envelopes and photographing contents before resealing them. They even placed listening devices in apartments, primitive bugs that could pick up conversations through walls. Can you imagine living like that, under surveillance but not knowing it? Every person you meet could be an informant. Every conversation could be recorded, every move watched. The paranoia would destroy most people. But the Red Orchestra agents didn't know. They thought they were safe. They kept transmitting. Then came the second mistake. In August 1942, Moscow sent a message to Brussels with a list of names. Real names, not code names. The message was intercepted, decoded. And suddenly the Gestapo had a roster of the entire Berlin network. Still, they waited. They wanted to be sure they had everyone. The message was a catastrophic breach of tradecraft. Someone in Moscow, probably overworked and exhausted, had forgotten to use code names. Or perhaps they thought the message was so well encrypted it didn't matter. But the Germans had been working on Soviet codes for years. They had captured codebooks from other networks. They had brilliant cryptographers who lived for the challenge of breaking unbreakable ciphers. And now they had the crown jewels, a complete list of Red Orchestra agents in Berlin. August 31, 1942. Worst. Harry Schütze-Boysen was at home with his wife Libertas. They were planning to go sailing that weekend, take a break from the stress of their double life. The doorbell rang. Harry answered it. 3 men in leather coats, criminal police. You need to come with us." Libertas watched her husband being led away. She knew this was the end, but she didn't run. Where would she go? Who would help her? She waited. 5 days later, they came for her too. The same night they arrested Haro, they took Arvid Harnack, his American wife Mildred, Hans Koppe and his pregnant wife Hilda. Within 72 hours, they had arrested over 100 members of the Red Orchestra. The network that had taken years to build was destroyed in a weekend. The arrests were coordinated with military precision. Teams struck simultaneously across Berlin to prevent anyone warning others. They knew exactly where everyone would be because they'd been watching for months. They knew Harnack attended an economics seminar every Friday. They knew Koppe visited his mother on weekends. They knew the routines, the habits, the patterns of life, and they used that knowledge to destroy lives. But here's what the Nazis didn't expect. These weren't Soviet fanatics. They weren't trained agents who would die before talking. They were ordinary Germans who'd chosen conscience over country, and many of them, faced with torture and death, showed a courage that their interrogators couldn't understand. The interrogations took place at Prinz Albrechtstrasse 8, Gestapo headquarters, a building that had once been an art school, now converted into chambers of horror. The interrogators were professionals who understood that physical torture was just one tool. They used psychological pressure, threatening families, offering deals, playing prisoners against each other. They had Haro and Arvid in cells next to each other, letting each hear the other's screams. Haro Schulze-Boysen was tortured for weeks. They broke his fingers, his ribs. They used techniques that I won't describe because some things shouldn't be spoken. But he gave them nothing operational, no codes, no contacts they didn't already have. He talked about ideology, about why he'd done it, about his hatred for what Germany had become. But he protected everyone he could. During one interrogation session, Haro was confronted with evidence of his activities, photographs he'd taken of secret documents, transcripts of intercepted radio messages. The Gestapo interrogator, a man named Habecker, couldn't understand why a German officer would betray his country. "You had everything," he said. "Career, status, a beautiful wife. Why throw it away for the Bolsheviks?" Haro's response was recorded in the interrogation transcript. "I didn't betray Germany. I tried to save it from you." Mildred Harnack, the American woman who'd given up her country for her husband's cause, faced her interrogators with remarkable dignity. She quoted Goethe to them, discussed philosophy, refused to show fear even when they described in detail what would happen to her. She knew she would die. She accepted it. What she couldn't accept was living in a world that permitted what the Nazis were doing. The trials were a foregone conclusion. Hitler personally involved himself, demanding death sentences. He read the interrogation reports, annotated them with his own hand, writing "No mercy" in the margins. The military court that tried them was told in advance what verdicts to reach. This wasn't justice, it was theatre. On December 22, 1942, Arvid Harnack and Haro Schulze-Boysen were hanged at Plötzensee prison. They used thin rope so the execution would take longer. Hitler wanted them to suffer. The executioner, Wilhelm Rittger, later testified that Haro took over 13 minutes to die. They were conscious for most of it. But here's what breaks my heart. Hilda Koppe, Hans's wife, was 8 months pregnant when she was arrested. They let her give birth in prison, let her hold her son for a few weeks. Then they took him away and executed her. She was 27 years old. Her son grew up never knowing that his mother died fighting for a better world. The baby was named Hans, after his father. He was raised by his grandmother, who told him his parents died in an air raid. It wasn't until he was 16 that he learned the truth, that his parents were heroes who chose conscience over comfort, truth over safety. He spent the rest of his life researching their story, trying to understand the people he never got to know. What if these people had survived? What if their intelligence had been believed and acted on? How many lives could have been saved? How different might history have been? We'll never know. But we can ask ourselves what their sacrifice means for us today. The execution method itself was deliberately cruel. Plötzensee prison had an execution shed with 8 meat hooks attached to a steel beam. The condemned were hanged with thin piano wire that cut into the neck, prolonging the agony. Hitler sometimes watched filmed executions, savouring his enemies' suffering. The Red Orchestra members faced this barbaric death with extraordinary courage. Witnesses reported that many of them sang or recited poetry as they were led to their deaths. Think about Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange. Modern people who transmitted secrets that powerful governments wanted hidden. They used computers instead of radios, encryption software instead of one-time pads. But the principle is the same. Information wants to be free, power wants to control it. And in between stand individuals who must choose. Like the Red Orchestra, modern whistleblowers face surveillance by their own governments. Like Hans Copy at his transmitter, they know that the moment they hit send, they become targets. Like Mildred Harnack, they often sacrifice comfortable lives for principle. The technology has evolved, but the moral calculus remains identical. The technology has changed, but the human element remains constant. Fear versus conscience, safety versus truth, the comfortable lie versus the dangerous reality. Every whistleblower faces the same choice the Red Orchestra faced. Do you speak up knowing it will cost you everything? Or do you stay silent and live with the knowledge of what you didn't do? But if you think this story ends with executions and defeat, you're wrong, because the Red Orchestra's sacrifice wasn't meaningless. Their intelligence, even when ignored, created a record. After the war, when the full extent of Nazi crimes was revealed, no one could say they didn't know. The Red Orchestra had told them, had died trying to tell them. And scattered across Europe, survivors of the network lived to see Nazi Germany destroyed. Leopold Trepper, the master spy, survived the war and wrote his memoirs. He revealed how the network operated, how ordinary people became heroes, how courage isn't the absence of fear but action, despite fear. Trepper's survival was itself a miracle. After the Brussels network was rolled up, he was arrested and tortured. But he convinced the Germans he could be turned, that he could run a radio game against Moscow. For months he transmitted false information under German control while secretly alerting Moscow through prearranged danger signals. Eventually he escaped and went into hiding, surviving the war in occupied Paris. Some of the radio operators who escaped lived into the computer age. They saw their primitive transmitters replaced by satellites and fiber optics. But they recognized the same patterns. Governments still spy on their citizens, still classify information that should be public, still punish those who reveal uncomfortable truths. The technology evolves, but the game remains the same. One survivor, Alexander Korotkov, became a professor of communications in East Germany. He taught a new generation about radio technology, never mentioning his own experience until after the Berlin Wall fell. Then he revealed that every technical detail he taught had been learned in life-or-death circumstances, transmitting from safe houses while the Gestapo hunted him. What would you do with information that could save lives but destroy you? Would you transmit it, knowing that detection means death? Would you trust strangers with your life because you share a common enemy? Would you choose truth over tribe, conscience over country? These aren't abstract questions. Every time you see injustice and stay silent, you make a choice. Every time you have information that could help someone but might hurt you, you make a choice. Every time you decide between comfortable complicity and dangerous resistance, you're facing the same decision the Red Orchestra faced. The stakes might be lower, but the principle is identical. Consider the modern surveillance state. The NSA can monitor every electronic communication. Cameras watch every street. Algorithms analyze every social media post. Credit card transactions, cell phone locations, internet searches all tracked, recorded, analyzed. We live in a panopticon that would have amazed even Orwell. Yet people still resist, still leak, still transmit truth despite the consequences. The members of the Red Orchestra weren't born heroes. Arvid Harnack was a quiet academic who loved books more than politics. Harro Schulze-Boysen was a poet who wrote about beauty and truth. Mildred Harnack was a teacher who wanted nothing more than to share her love of literature. They became heroes because history demanded it. Because they looked at their world and decided that some things matter more than personal survival. Today we live in a world of mass surveillance that would have amazed even the Gestapo. Every email can be read, every phone call recorded, every movement tracked. The technology that was supposed to free us has become a tool of control. But we also have tools the Red Orchestra couldn't imagine: encryption they couldn't break, networks they couldn't shut down, ways to transmit truth that no government can fully stop. The question isn't whether we have the tools, it's whether we have the courage. When we see wrong, do we speak? When we have information that matters, do we share it? When power demands our silence, do we comply or resist? Let me tell you something that haunts me about this story. The Red Orchestra agents died believing they'd failed. They never knew that their intelligence helped the Soviets prepare for Kursk, that their warnings about German war production led to targeted bombing raids, that their sacrifice inspired others to resist. They died thinking it was all for nothing. This is the cruelest aspect of their story. They never saw the fruits of their sacrifice. Harrow died not knowing that his intelligence about Luftwaffe fuel shortages helped the Soviets plan their air campaigns. Arvid died not knowing that his economic intelligence revealed critical weaknesses in German war production. Mildred died not knowing that her recruitment of other agents created intelligence chains that survived her death. But movements don't die with their members. Ideas don't hang with their believers. Every act of resistance inspires another. Every transmission of truth makes the next one easier. Every person who says no to power makes it harder for power to demand yes. The code books are declassified. The operators are dead, but their frequency is still open, waiting for someone to pick up the key and start transmitting, waiting for someone to send the message that power doesn't want heard. Modern technology has made us all potential radio operators. Every smartphone is a transmitter. Every social media post is a broadcast. Every encrypted message is a clandestine communication. We have powers the Red Orchestra couldn't dream of. But do we have their courage? What if everyone who knew a secret that mattered told it? What if every witness to wrongdoing spoke up? What if we all decided that truth matters more than comfort, that justice matters more than safety? The powerful fear this more than any army. They fear the moment when ordinary people decide to stop being ordinary. The Red Orchestra was destroyed because they were too few, too isolated, too vulnerable. But imagine a world where everyone is an operator, where every citizen is a potential transmitter of truth, where the network is so vast that it can't be rolled up. That's the world we live in now. The question is whether we'll use it. I think about Hans Koppe, 25 years old, sitting at his transmitter while his pregnant wife watched for the Gestapo. What gave him the courage to keep transmitting? Was it ideology, hatred of fascism, love of humanity, or was it simpler? The knowledge that if good people do nothing, evil wins by default. The members of the Red Orchestra couldn't save themselves, but they might have saved us. They showed us that resistance is possible even under the worst tyranny, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That courage is contagious if we let it spread. Every authoritarian government fears what the Red Orchestra represented, not the intelligence they gathered or the secrets they transmitted, but the fact that they existed at all. The proof that no matter how total the control, how severe the punishment, how perfect the surveillance, some people will always choose truth over safety. What if the Red Orchestra hadn't existed? What if everyone in Nazi Germany had chosen silence? What if collaboration had been universal? We'd live in a different world, a darker world, a world where power learned it could do anything without resistance. The Red Orchestra didn't stop the Holocaust, didn't prevent the war, didn't save the millions who died, but they saved something else. The idea that resistance is always possible. Modern China has networks of dissidents using encrypted communications to share truth about government atrocities. Modern Russia has journalists risking their lives to report on corruption and war crimes. Modern America has whistleblowers revealing surveillance programs and corporate crimes. They're all using the Red Orchestra's frequency. Different technology, same courage. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us would have been collaborators. Statistical fact. In Nazi Germany, active resistors were less than 1% of the population. Most people kept their heads down, did their jobs, followed orders, told themselves they had no choice. The same is true today. When we see wrong, most of us say nothing. When we could help, most of us walk by. When history calls, most of us don't answer. They picked up the transmitter when everyone else was silent. They sent the message when everyone else was afraid. They died believing in something bigger than themselves. Not country, not party, not even ideology. They believed in truth, in the radical idea that facts matter, that crimes should be exposed, that power should be challenged. What message would you send if you had their courage? What truth would you transmit if you weren't afraid? What would you risk to be heard? These aren't historical questions. They're immediate, urgent, personal, because somewhere right now someone is sitting at a modern transmitter, finger hovering over send, wondering if the message they're about to transmit is worth the price they'll pay. The Red Orchestra paid the ultimate price, but their signal is still traveling, still reaching receivers, still inspiring new operators to pick up the key and start transmitting. Every time someone speaks truth to power, they're on the Red Orchestra's frequency. Every time someone chooses conscience over comfort, they're continuing the transmission. Feel that electricity in the air? That's not your imagination. That's the same energy Hans Coppi felt when he connected his antenna, the same current that ran through Harro Schulze-Boysen when he photographed secret documents. The same power that gave Mildred Harnack the strength to face her executioners without flinching. It's the energy of resistance, and it's looking for new conductors. The Gestapo thought they'd silenced the Red Orchestra forever when they executed its members. They were wrong. They killed the operators, but not the operation. They destroyed the transmitters, but not the transmission. Because the real message of the Red Orchestra wasn't in the intelligence they sent to Moscow, it was in the act itself, the proof that some people will always choose truth over safety, justice over comfort, resistance over collaboration. That message is still transmitting, still looking for receivers, still waiting for someone to pick up the frequency and continue the broadcast. Radio waves have become fiber optics. Morse code has become encrypted data. But the essential act remains the same. Someone knows something that power wants hidden. Someone decides to transmit it. Someone risks everything to be heard. We're approaching the end of this story, but I need you to understand something. The Red Orchestra didn't end in 1942. It didn't end with executions at Plötzensee prison. It didn't end when the last radio fell silent. It continues every time someone chooses truth over silence. Every time someone transmits what power wants hidden. Every time someone picks up the key and starts tapping out resistance. You want to know the most subversive thing about the Red Orchestra? They were amateurs, not trained spies, not professional agents. Teachers, economists, artists, mothers, students. People like you, people who looked at their world and decided that doing nothing was complicity. That silence was collaboration. That safety purchased with cowardice wasn't worth having. They made mistakes, used real names in transmissions. Met too frequently, trusted the wrong people. Professional spies would have lasted longer. But professional spies wouldn't have had their impact, because the power of the Red Orchestra wasn't in their tradecraft, it was in their choice, the choice of ordinary people to do extraordinary things, the choice that's available to all of us. What if everyone listening to this decided to transmit one truth that power wants hidden? What if we all became operators on the frequency of resistance? What if we stopped waiting for heroes and became them ourselves? The infrastructure exists. The technology is available. All that's missing is courage. The same courage Hans Coppi found at his transmitter. The same courage Mildred Harnack showed facing death. The same courage that turns ordinary people into legends. The Red Orchestra was crushed because it was ahead of its time. An analog network in an analog age. Limited by geography, technology, human endurance. But we live in the digital age. The age of instant global communication. The age where every person can be a transmitter, where every truth can circle the globe before power can stop it. We have advantages the Red Orchestra couldn't imagine, but do we have their will? I'll leave you with one final image. It's December 22, 1942, Plötzensee prison. Arvid Harnack is being led to the execution chamber. He knows he's about to die, knows his network is destroyed, knows his wife will follow him to death. But he's not broken, he's not defeated, because he knows something his executioners don't. Ideas don't die with their believers. Resistance doesn't end with the resistors. Truth doesn't hang with those who tell it. As they put the rope around his neck, Arvid might have thought about the messages he sent, the intelligence that warned about German plans, the lives that might have been saved if someone had listened. But I think he thought about something else. The next ordinary hero who would choose truth over safety, the next member of an orchestra that would never stop playing, that person could be you. The frequency is open, the key is waiting, the message needs sending, all you have to do is start transmitting. The ghost of the Red Orchestra is listening, the spirit of resistance is alive, the frequency of truth is eternal. And somewhere, right now, someone is tuning in, waiting to hear what you have to say. Will you pick up the key? Will you join the orchestra? Will you transmit the truth that power fears? The choice is yours, it always has been. From the moment Hans Koppe first sat down at his radio to the moment you finish watching this video, the same choice, safety or truth, silence or transmission, collaboration or resistance. The Red Orchestra chose transmission, they chose truth, they chose resistance, and they died for it. But their death wasn't defeat, it was inspiration. It was proof that some things matter more than survival, that some truths are worth any price, that some transmissions must be sent regardless of consequence. Subscribe if you want more hidden histories that explain our present. Comment below with the truth you'd transmit if you had the courage. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because the Red Orchestra isn't just history. It's prophecy, it's warning, it's inspiration. It's the reminder that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they choose to use it. The radio is crackling, the frequency is clear, the message is urgent, and the world is listening. What will you transmit? Remember the words of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, executed by the Nazis just days before liberation. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. The Red Orchestra acted, they spoke, they transmitted truth into the darkness. Their radios are silent now, but their frequency remains open, waiting for the next operator, waiting for the next hero, waiting for you, dit-dit-dit-dit-da-da-da, dit-dit-dit-dit, the signal of distress, the call for help, the universal message that something is wrong and someone needs to act. The Red Orchestra sent that signal 70 years ago. It's still transmitting, still echoing through history, still waiting for an answer. Will you answer? Will you pick up the key? Will you join the orchestra that never stops playing? The choice is yours. The frequency is open. The world is listening. Start transmitting.